Hey everyone, my name is Hamaji and today I'm going to be upgrading my KBD75V2 keyboard. So this is a keyboard I built roughly 3 months ago and there are a lot of flaws with it. It was my first ever high-end build, so at the time I was still learning a lot, so I made a lot of mistakes along the way. The switches were inconsistently lubed, my stabilizers were really rattly, my soldering wasn't great, so overall it was a very mediocre build. So for today's project, I'm going to disassemble my old build and give it a well-deserved upgrade. But before we begin, just a reminder that if you guys want to see more of this type of content, you can subscribe and it really helps the channel. Alright, so firstly, let's address the switches. Originally, I used Gateron black inks lubed with Krytox 205G0 and no switch film. And honestly, they didn't sound that bad. They were, however, slightly overlubed, and that definitely made the bottom out experience not very satisfying, and sound-wise, it was very muted, and if you listen really closely, it was kind of mushy. So for today, I'm still going to be using the Gateron black inks lubed with Krytox, but this time, I'm going to be adding desk keys switch films to improve the acoustics. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with filming a switch is basically adding a thin layer of plastic in the middle of the switch housing. This does two main things. It reduces the overall wobble the switch has, and it also improves the acoustics. It's hard to describe, but a switch without any film will usually sound a tiny bit hollow, and it always depends on the switch, but from my experience, a switch with no film will usually have a slightly higher pitch than one with film. There will of course be differences depending on what film you end up using. There are a lot of variants and types of switch films, and usually it really depends on the switch, but what I can say is that usually the thicker the film, the thockier the switch. But again, it really depends on the switch. But filming switches won't change how the keyboard sounds completely. The case and the plate are also very big factors on how your keyboard will sound. You should definitely make sure to keep other factors in mind, like the plate you're going to be using, your keycaps, and of course the case. Alright, so next up we have the stabilizers. One huge mistake I made as a beginner is using default clip-in stabilizers. These suck. Default clip-in stabilizers are one of the few things in the keyboard world that are undeniably terrible. Do not use these stabilizers under any circumstances, unless you're being held at gunpoint. Then I mean, clip-in stabilizers in general are just not the best, as it can introduce a lot of wobble and therefore rattle. Screw-in stabilizers eliminate a lot of these problems by being screwed onto the PCB and restricting a lot of unnecessary movement. For today's upgrade, I'm going to be using Durox Smoky screw-in stabilizers. I've been asked to use these stabilizers many times as they are regarded as some of the best stabilizers out there. One cool thing about these stabilizers is that they are also translucent, meaning that you can see where the wires go during any movement, and you'll also be able to see how much lube really is inside the housing. They also have gold plated wires which just look really nice as well. I'm going to keep the lubing process pretty similar. I'm going to lube the stabilizer housing with Krytox 205G0, and I'm going to use a very generous amount. And then I'm also going to lube the point of contact between the stabilizer housing and the wire with dielectric grease. Dielectric grease is really thick, so it's not a great idea to use it everywhere, but using it where the wire clips onto the stabilizer housing helps to reduce a lot of rattle. Another thing I didn't do in my previous build is band-aiding my stabilizers, which is basically adding some thin tape or foam on the bottom of the stabilizer to remove any wobbling. This is a very important step, and it really helps to make sure the stabilizers sound smooth and clean when used. So this time I've made sure to apply some thin tape on the PCB to reduce any movement. This, in my opinion, is definitely one of the most important things to do for any keyboard, and is one of the things that I still want to master as a keyboard builder. So after the stabs are screwed into the PCB, I also added some more lube at the back end of the stab, and this is crucial if you want to get your stabilizers as smooth as possible. It's called plugging the butt, and you can thank Mentally for that name. It's a really good way to ensure that every part of the stabilizer is lubed, and I can highly recommend that you do the same if you are lubing your stabilizers. The next thing I want to talk about is the plate. I'm going to be reusing the brass plate that I originally used for this build, but honestly the brass plate is a bit of a 50-50 for me. On one end, I really love how solid it is. It makes the typing experience feel really robust and rigid, which is something I can appreciate. But on the other end, it makes my Gateron black ink slightly higher pitched than if it were put on an aluminum plate. So part of me wishes I got an aluminum plate instead for that deep thockiness I really like, but I am also really happy with the results that the brass plate gets. So, you know, in the end, it's alright. So it's definitely something to consider for the next build, and it's something that you guys should look into before building a custom keyboard. So after all of that, I can now begin putting the switches into the PCB and soldering it in place. I'm still learning a lot about effective soldering, so there's not much advice I can really give, but please do this in a well-ventilated area, or at least have a fan blowing the fumes away from you. Solder fumes are not good for you and can cause a lot of long-term damage if you are not careful. Other than that, watch some tutorials and just keep practicing. I'm still learning a lot. Alright, so after soldering all of the switches into the PCB, I can begin reassembling the keyboard. But one thing I want to quickly talk about was foam. I usually add foam into my builds to reduce any hollowness, but the KBD75V2 has a very interesting shape and design, which makes it really hard to effectively put foam in it. KBD Fans does sell a thin foam cutout for the keyboard, but it is pretty tough to effectively put in without first filling in the hole from the bottom tray mount. So ultimately, I just decided to not put any foam in because I've never really had any issues with the keyboard sounding hollow anyways. And even when I did put foam into the keyboard, the sound signature would change drastically, and this is all down to preference, but it sounded pretty muted and it didn't have that same thockiness that I really like, so I just chose to remove the foam completely. So with the keyboard fully assembled, I can make one last upgrade. I purchased a KBD75V2 brass weight to add to the keyboard. This isn't something that will really change the overall sound signature of the keyboard, but I mean, it looks so cool. The best part is that you can easily remove the default aluminum weight from the back of the case and replace it with the brass one. So all you have to do is just slide it in and screw it in place, and there you go. The KBD75V2 is now fully upgraded. The addition of the brass weight makes the case feel so much more premium and heavy, which is something I personally really like. And again, it just looks amazing when paired with the nice matte black of the KBD75V2. I've stuck with the same GMK 8008 keycaps because I think it still looks really nice on this board. And to finish it all off, I also got sent a beautiful custom cable from Space Cable. This is in the modern Dolce colorway, which I absolutely adore. It's sleeved with paracord and tech flex for additional protection, and it also has my logo engraved on the aviator, which is so sick. If you guys want to get your own custom made space cable, you can go to his website, link in the description below. Okay, so let's listen to how it sounds and compare it to my previous attempt a few months ago. Alright, so at first glance, the keyboards do sound, a little bit similar, but the more I began to listen to these side by side, the more I realized just how much better the upgraded version sounded. The main differences that were immediately obvious to me were the stabilizers. The Dork stabilizers have made a huge difference, and they definitely sound way better than the default clip-in stabs. The upgraded stabilizers have way less rattle and just sound a lot smoother. The film switches also sound a lot more consistent and way cleaner. If you listen on speakers, it's pretty tough to notice, but with headphones on, it's pretty clear that after being filmed and lubed properly, the switches sound a lot more smooth, dense, and quiet. It's hard to describe in words, but it's a much cleaner sounding switch. With all of that said, I still think that I could have done way better with the spacebar. It still has a tiny bit of rattle, and I really need to work on that. But other than that, I am still really happy with the final build. Being able to upgrade this keyboard is really fulfilling, and it reminds me of just how much I've learned along the way. This keyboard was actually the reason I got into the whole keyboard content creator creator scene, so it is very important to me. It has a lot of sentimental value, and I'm really happy that I can give it the love that it deserves. Anyways, that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please do consider subscribing, and if you want to support my channel, you can follow me on Twitter or join my Discord group. Let me know what you guys thought about this upgrade in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.